getting plenty? Are you
Of
getting?
course, they were just waking up as I was leaving. I said, it must be nice.
Are you getting plenty of practice on your French?
Yeah, because they don't speak a lot of English. So I'm also tired because I've been speaking French for 5 days, which is the most I've spoken French in about 5 years. So my brain is tired, my body's tired. We took them to play pickleball yesterday, and they are now trying to import pickleball to France. They're very excited about that experience. So anyways, it might take me a little bit to get rolling this morning. Okay, we are up and running. The stream, I think, is good. It appears to be so. So let's talk. So the topic. Well, anyway, the topic for the next X weeks, where X is a variable undetermined as of yet, is this concept of stained glass language. Again, thank you, Jill, for this terminology. I think it was very appropriate. And I'll talk a little bit about, in a little bit, I will talk about kind of the method we're going to use in talking about this. But before we get started, let's give you guys a chance to talk. Any words, when we started talking about this topic, any words right off the bat that you thought of that either you don't understand, right, which is A-okay to admit that there are words or ideas that we don't fully comprehend, or you are confused about because you've heard that word used in a bunch of different ways, or is simply a word that you think is fascinating and you want to look more at. Anything right off the bat.
Should be interesting.
And by the way, I'm gonna ask this question every week, right? So when we come in, I hope that as we talk more and more about stuff, that you'll have your eyes and your ears open to these words or ideas or concepts. It doesn't have to be a single word, it could be, a concept in general that you encounter either in reading the news or reading a book or even stuff that pops up in worship or in a sermon, because that's also one of the things that I think is part of this stained glass language is if you read through our liturgy, which right there, right, you've got a word that we use. If you read through our liturgy, it's chock full of stained glass language. It's chock full of these concepts that we kind of throw about pretty frequently, but if you were encountering Christianity for the first time, might really have a tough time comprehending exactly what we were talking about.
I remember in confirmation, our pastor always talked about sanctification.
Yeah.
And I never, who knows?
Yeah.
A good 5-syllable word.
That's a real evangelical word.
Yeah, it is.
A real Nazarene word.
And this, by the way, is one of these really good stained glass words where the definition of sanctification varies greatly depending upon the context that you were in.
Yep.
Brenda was like, that's an evangelical word, that's a Pentecostal word.
How about evangelical?
Yeah, that's right there. Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that this morning too. And by the way, I fully intend that we're going to revisit these words as we, revisit various words as we go through this. Evangelical.
A word that's used differently that I find awkward is gospel.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the word that even made me say
I'm
this.
still going to write it down now.
Yeah. Is glory.
Mm-hmm.
It's been said so much that now it means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that as well. Born again.
What was the first one that he was on the liturgy?
Which, by the way, here's your grammar lesson today. It's hyphenated if it comes before a noun,
Thank you.
but it's not hyphenated if it comes after.
How about righteousness?
Righteousness, yes. These are, we're hitting them. These are the words.
I can see it.
And what I'll do at the end of the day is I'll take a picture of this so that I remember the words that we
Fear.
should fear and love the Lord your God.
Yeah.
Which is like, I thought those two things were kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. Anything else?
Well, put down Catholic, both
Catholic,
Lord,
big C or little c?
Both.
Yeah.
In judgment.
Which is one of my most misspelled words. Because it feels like there should be an E after that. Talk about the idiosyncrasies of the English language, right? Here's one that French people would have a hard time pronouncing. Jugement. Anything else?
I can't think of the word, but it's the one where you turn around.
Repent. Repentance. And Ruby, you encouraged me there. Yeah, your concept of repentance is turning around, because that is something I have talked about before. I don't know if I'm not going to be so egotistical to think that you got it from me, but perhaps I'll reinforce that. Yeah, repentance. Actually, I'm going to, well, I'm over there. I'll do it anyway. So let's talk about, let's talk about words in general. And somebody already said, was it Linda, words, if you use them enough, they lose meaning. Pat, did you have something, sir?
No, I just thought Catholic meant universal.
It does, right? I mean,
With the
so
little c.
I put big C Catholic, the little c Catholic means universal, yeah. And this is what we're talking about. So the method that we're going to use during this study is we're going to do three things. So the first thing we're going to do with any word is we're going to talk about what it means now. And this is not necessarily going to be one thing, right? Like, for example, sanctification today, depending on who you're talking to, could mean a lot of different things. And we're going to do our best to kind of explore that. Now, keep in mind, we've got a specific demographic in this room, right? Although of varied backgrounds. So, not to oust anybody, but how many of you were raised Lutheran?
Raised Lutheran.
Oh, more than I expected. How many of you were raised something else? Thank goodness. We got 75-25.
Religious.
Um,
Yeah.
So we're not exactly the most diverse in terms of theological backgrounds, but again, not to put Brenda on the stand here, but her experience of sanctification is probably very different than the concept that we grew up with. Yeah. So we're going to talk about what these words mean now, and
Can we also break down the word itself as to the origin?
we're getting there.
Oh.
We're getting there. So that's going to be step one. What do these words mean now? Okay. Step two is what have these or what did these words mean? Okay. And this is kind of, again, tough, and we're going to make choices with regards to that, because the reality is that over the 2,000 odd years of history of Christianity, the meanings of these words have changed several times, right? They've oscillated back and forth. So if we really wanted to be thorough, we would trace the word all the way through. We're not going to do that, right? We're going to talk about what it means today, and we're going to talk about what it meant biblically. Okay. Joe and Susan.
If we're going to talk about transitions, one of the words that annoys me to no end, mostly because I've read one of Luther's books, is the omnis, right?
Omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient.
Omnipotent and all that. Those words have changed their meaning.
Yeah, that's good.
The other one I was thinking of was spiritual, but
Spiritual.
not religious,
It's-
and religious.
And that's a great one to talk about as well too. Especially this is the cliche of I'm spiritual but not religious that we tend to encounter. And not that people who articulate that are cliche, but from a religious perspective, it's kind of like, okay, meaning you want to all my life. So we're going to talk about what did they mean, and the way that we're going to do that is a couple of ways. One, we're going to look at the word in the biblical context, where we define it, So we talked about what did that word mean? Well, here's the problem, is that it's not the same word, right? So for example, when when Paul talks about evangelism, he's using the Greek word euangelion, okay, which has a definition, right? It has a usage. It also has a context. So one of the contexts that is talked about frequently is euangelion was the term that applied when a new territory was possessed by the Roman Empire, and runners would bring the news back to Rome, proclaiming the good news, the euangelion of this addition to the empire, right? And this is also one of the fantastic and very confusing things, is that one of the things that Paul and his contemporaries tend to do a lot is take imperial language and subvert it for their own purposes. So when we talk about what does the word mean, it's not just what is its dictionary definition, it's why were they using it that way, and were they making a statement by using that word? And the answer is oftentimes yes, right? But it's also, when we talk about etymology, when we talk about translation, we talk about languages, we've already, we've beat this horse many times, but you have the problem of, just in general, what exactly does that word mean? And we can pick a word, right? So again, we can create this word evangelical, which is the translation of evangelion, and we think we know what it means, but in reality, we have forever and completely lost the original meaning of that word, right? Specifically because we didn't live in that context. And so one of the things that we're going to do in trying to figure out what did that word mean, it's not just pull open our Greek interlinear and see what words translated. We're going to talk about context. We're going to talk about evangelical with regard to the Roman Empire. We're going to talk about sanctification, sanctus, which is a Latin term, right? That is talking about the Spirit, but the words that were used in the Bible were pneuma, wind, and ruach, breath, right? So we'll talk about those things as well. So that's step 2. Finally, step 3 is we're going to talk about how do we live these words. So we'll go through, talk about what they mean now. We're going to talk about what they used to mean, and we're going to try to explore. Okay, we've got maybe an understanding of meaning, but what do they actually mean to our lives, right? So, okay, sanctification means different things to different people. Paul probably had a specific idea or ideas in mind. He talked about sanctification. What does it actually mean to our lives of faith? How do we apply sanctification to the way in which we are Christian at Lutheran? Which, speaking of, that's another word that we should add up here, is Christian. A couple pieces of complication as well too. Words only have the meaning that we attribute to them. Okay? So in other words, their words do not have native meaning. They only have meaning if we use them or if we understand them. And this is especially prevalent today, insofar as that, I'm sure you're all paying attention to the election coverage and all that as I am, but the way in which we just fling words around willy-nilly, as somebody said earlier, so many of the words that are in our common lexicon have completely lost any meaning because their meanings are so varied and diverse and can mean the opposite thing, right? That word has no meaning. Anybody an Orwell fan? Anybody read 1984? Remember that book, New Speech? So at the end of 1984, there's an appendix, which is the lexicon of new speech, right? Wherein Orwell goes through and talks about, and it's really fascinating the way he does it, talks about from an external perspective, the core concept of new speech. One of them that I find really fascinating is that, again, 1984 is about an oppressive regime, right? He tries to control the thoughts and the feelings and, of course, the tendency towards revolution of its oppressed people. And one of the ways they do this is by controlling language. And in new speech, they just straight up remove words, right? So words like justice, right, this is the literal truth, right? In other words, this is the facts as presented. But of course, in the last 20 years, literal has come to mean its exact opposite, which is metaphorical. Right? So I'm literally dying of thirst right now, right? How many have heard their teenagers say that? And it's like, no, you're not dying of thirst, number one. I understand that you are thirsty, but you are, by any of the definition of literal, you are not, has nothing to do with a book, right? You are not exercising a literal, i.e. literature understanding of thirst. You are not truly, actually dying of thirst. But of course, that is the way that word is translated so often in our common lexicon. So one of the things that we have to come to terms with is we're going to go through this whole thing. We're going to talk about what a word means, what it used to mean, and how can we live it. But also understanding that the word might simply be a lost cause as well too. And kind of ask the question: can we reclaim this word, or do we find a new way of articulating that idea? Linda.
Well, just as an example that happened this morning on a show called Sunday Morning, is they were talking about the definition of words and how they've changed. And what would you define a brat?
Yeah.
A
And
brat?
brat girl summer. I barely know this.
Yeah, well, I didn't know it at all.
And that's a good term now. Yeah, it's a rebel.
It's a reference term, but it's not great.
Yeah. And I don't understand it. And here's case in point, right? Is that I have heard about it in pop culture. I think I might know what it means, but I'm not a 14-year-old girl, so I have no clue what it means.
Well,
right?
what they explained was a brat, as we were growing up, is
Yeah.
an uncontrollable child.
Ill-behaved pain in the butt.
Yeah. A brat nowadays means somebody who speaks that doesn't have all the knowledge that they should have to speak.
That's one meaning of it, yes. And it's also because of Charlie XK, I don't know, some pop singer had released an album called Rat Girl Summer, and she has coined this term, rat girl, meaning somebody who doesn't follow the rules. I think that's what that means.
I Googled it, that's what I think.
Okay, great. That's the best I can do.
So how about then situations like the English language is very dynamic and changing, as you just expressed.
Oh, dude.
How about Latin and French?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
very controlled.
Yeah.
I mean, for the French to adopt language for computers was incredible, because it's hard for them to do that.
Yes.
And they have a whole authoritative figure or group that actually dictates how they put words into
Mostly men. But yeah, they're and I can't remember the term for it, but they're literally is a board of people who determine whether or not a word can be admitted to the French lexicon. And there are rules or guidelines for it. And also not just whether it can be admitted to the French lexicon, but which is especially important because it determines whether it can be used in the state or not, whether it's recognized language, which is something that we distinctly lack. Okay, this is another really fascinating gender language, which I'm gonna actually is gonna come up in the sermon at this point. But yeah, I mean, that's the other piece is you know, when we talk about what language means, we Americans live in we have a language which is cobbled together from a bunch of other different languages. I don't know if you appreciate that, right? So, you know, this is the fun thing about etymology of American English is that, you know, if you want to win a spelling bee, you need to know Greek and Latin because you need to know how whether a word is of a Greek or Latin origin affects its spelling, especially if it has a suffix, right? So like en versus on and other examples. But also how many, for example, French words have become common parlance in our lexicon, right? Resume, French. Here's one of the ones that absolutely drives my wife and other French people nuts. What do you call the lacy things that you buy at Victoria's Secret?
Lingerie,
How do you say it?
lingerie.
Lingerie, yeah, that's how it's spelled. You know how it's pronounced in French? Lingerie. And so they're like, what is this lingerie that you're talking of? And it seems like a minor pronunciation issue. For whatever reason, it absolutely drives them up a wall.
Well, Elaine asked me when we were doing the food packing one time, what's hominy?
Hominy.
And I said, say that again, what's
Hominy.
hominy?
Because the H.
Yeah, and I said, you mean hominy? And
Yes.
she said, what is it? I said, well, you know, it's a type of a corn.
Yeah. She to this day will sometimes tell people that when I was in high school, I played the hobo. Because it's not just about pronouncing the H's that are there, it's sometimes adding an H when it isn't there. Yes.
Well, I have a
Gives
deaf,
me really weird looks when she brings that up and like,
I have a deaf friend who cannot pronounce Uber.
Oh, but that's another fascinating one. Is people that were born without hearing, who have learned to read lips and speak. It's just a fascinating concept in general of attempting to create sounds, but while never experiencing those sounds. You know, and it's actually miraculous to me that human beings can actually do that.
I use captions on my television, and
Oh, absolutely.
I can tell when a person is not speaking English. Like I can tell if
Because
they're
you can read
British
lips.
English.
You can functionally
And
read
then
lips.
I may not know the exact language, but I can say, oh yeah, they've got some kind of a dropping the end of this word or something. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. It's a good skill to have. Especially if you ever want to work in a courtroom or something like that. Or if you ever want to be an informant. We could talk about the idiosyncrasies of language. One last question. What are words now that have same word has multiple meanings?
Yes.
All of them.
All of them. But in common parlance, we already said we're at sick, right? Sick is in the Merriam-Webster definition meaning ill, but growing up sick in
Good.
my 1980s world of post-Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles meant pretty cool, man. Yeah, sick, rad, right? Fat, yeah, fat. Bad, thank you, Michael Jackson, for completely messing up that word.
Yeah.
And do not be misled that those kinds of double usages have existed in human language for all of time, right? And one of the, especially when we talk about Hebrew words, whoo boy, because keep in mind Hebrew, every word has a three-letter root, meaning that if every word has a three-letter root, okay, you're going to run out of variations really quickly. I don't remember the math. It's like they had 26 letters in their alphabet, so it's 26 3-factorial or something. I don't know, right? But you only have so many permutations that you can make with 26 total letters, and each word only having a three-letter root. Meaning that very often you have many words in the Hebrew lexicon that are the same a lot of these words that we talk about having lost their meaning today have lost their meaning because they've just simply been used in so many different contexts. Jill?
One of the teachings that I learned about the word righteous actually uses the server's term righteous.
Righteous, dude.
And meaning that they actually almost get the word exactly correct. In
Because
terms of what it means.
it's awesome. Whoever's watching the stream is going to be a little bit confused what I'm doing, but I'm going to take a picture of this now so that I can erase it. And we can start talking about stuff. And I'm going to reiterate, too. No, I don't want to open that door. Oh, good Lord. I'm going to talk about I lost the video. I'm going to start the webcam back up because I switched out the app that I was using.
You better apologize to them.
Yeah.
It's not them,
I
it's you.
apologize to the live stream. Well, we're back. That easy. Okay, so let's start with one of the good ones. Let's start with evangelical because this is a word that's in our denominational name. And how many of you have had conversation with friends or family or acquaintances who have been very confused that you belong to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America? Anybody got that? Yeah, all the time. In fact, when I tell people, who I am and what I do and what that means, I almost every time have to preface, I belong to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I'm an ordained pastor of the ELCA. It is not the same thing as an evangelical, and I have to be very careful about that. So let's talk. We've already hit a little bit, but what does evangelical mean? Good. Means good. What does it mean to evangelize? And we're going to play a little bit with
To spread the good news.
to spread the good news. Yeah. Spread the good news. What does it mean in the context of our denomination? Why do we call ourselves the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America? And I have no stinking idea is a perfectly reasonable answer to all two.
Is it the Swedes' fault?
This is the sweetest.
And I might defer here to somebody that was socially conscious when the ELCA was formed in 1987 or whatever.
That sounds like a Norwegian making a comment about sleep.
Yeah, it's a joke a little bit, but I think doesn't it come from that line of, I think it does.
As far as, I'll do my best here. I'll do my best because I was around but not around to get my meaning. It was obviously a conscious choice. So when the LCA and the ELC, which again, talking about terminology here, how confusing is that, right? So you think, explaining Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is bad. Try living in the 1970s when one of the major denominations was the Lutheran Church in America, and the other major denomination was the American Lutheran Church. Come on,
I
people.
thought evangelical meant more outgoing.
A little bit. They're outgoing, absolutely.
Wasn't it a Luther word?
It was. The evangelical was a word that was very important to Luther. And again, here is the textbook example of why used to that changing world, right? So, one of the things that, and I experienced this in seminary, one of the things that was constantly in tension for me in 2005 through 2009, even still in the 21st century, was a tension between two theoretical polarities of Lutheranism, which were missional and confessional. Anybody ever hear these words used in that context? Now talk about white tower problems. Right? This is also one of the things that's so fascinating is how many of these, and again, perfect example, how many of these words that are stained glass words are fought over and only have meaning within our white towers of churches, right? Which is why it's important to talk about this, because, when somebody asks you why is evangelical in the name of your denomination, you can articulate, well, here's what it means to us, right? In a way that you don't have to use, even the word gospel, right? Isn't that crazy? But how many people outside of Christianity that didn't grow up understand what the word gospel means? Because gospel, what's a full gospel church, right? Anybody drive by and see, so such and such full gospel congregation? What's a half gospel church, right? Or a quarter gospel, or a 1.5 times gospel church. What does it mean full gospel? It's different, it's complicated. Sorry, I love that stuff. So, go ahead, Susan. And this is absolutely. God, yes, exactly. Which is funny in 1984 in Orwell's book. Good think is orthodoxy, right? So they remove the word orthodox and replace it with the word good think. Yeah, and then you get any word. Sorry, nervous moment for a second. Any word can be used in any form of speech, right? So you're a good thinker. You do a lot of good thinking. Yeah, that's it. Anyway. Evangelical, according to Merriam-Webster. Definition number 1, just to give us context here, of relating to or being in agreement with the Christian gospel, especially as it is presented in the 4 Gospels. Okay, quick show of hands. Does that definition apply to our usage of evangelical? Yes or no? Yes, yeses. We got a lot of mixed. I thought that would be a more unanimous vote. Why or why not? There's no wrong answers here, because again, words are contextual. So in your context, why do you think that? And I'll repeat it. So evangelical, of relating to or being in agreement with the Christian gospel, especially as it is presented in the 4 Gospels.
Because it's being misinterpreted. So
Are you gay or nay?
I'm more questioning.
And I hear something in your questioning, which is as it's being interpreted, right? Which you've qualified that.
It's being misused
Yes.
for political purposes.
And let me clarify. So, for just this moment, let's set aside the complications of modern usage. That definition, as it's presented in Merriam-Webster, does that apply to us? And I guess what I'm asking is, do you like that definition? Is that a good definition for evangelical? So one more time. Of relating to or being in agreement with the Christian gospel, especially as it is presented in the 4 Gospels. What do you think, Susan? Got a yes?
So it's part of.
Yes. That's one of 5 definitions listed under Merriam-Webster. We'll go through each of them. So and I should be a little bit more clear here. What we're doing right now is we're talking about what does the word mean now. And the first thing we're going to do is, as we look at this word, for a moment we're setting aside the idea of how it's used elsewhere in society. And one of the things that I notice that you're all struggling with is the number of weighted words that are just in that definition. Christian, gospel, in agreement. How many of you went with in agreement, right? Or even the concept of the 4 Gospels. Right? Okay. Set that aside for a moment. In an ideal world, does that definition honest with Protestant. I see shaking of heads. I see shaking of heads. Martin Luther might disagree with you, but I kind of agree with you. Because this gets back to why was that word important to Luther? Because it was about the contrast between the big C Catholic Church, right, which was all about rules and regulations, right, for lack of, and I'm really, generalizing here, but, Luther's big deal was that the church had turned into a legalistic institution whose only job was to manage the population of Christians and make sure that they adhered to the norms of behavior as it applied to the lower class and not the wealthy. or, for that matter, the clergy, right? And so Luther's issue, one of many issues, 95 of them to be precise, many more than that, was that he felt that this church of gospel, of good news, I had it up there, right, should be about, his protest, literally, was that it should be about proclaiming good news to people, not just the good news of, well, if you adhere to these behaviors, you might get into heaven, right? This was his contrast. So, when he uses the word evangelical, it's about proclaiming that good news that you don't need to do anything to be saved. Oh boy, we're introducing another word. For your salvation, you don't need to do anything. Salvation comes through grace. Oh, there's another word that we're throwing in there, right? Salvation comes through grace alone, But on the other hand, maybe the guy was, you know, a violent abuser and, you know, a jerk and blah, 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 and he was suddenly repentant of his misbehaviors because he understood the consequences. Does that mean he gets to skip the consequences? I have no idea.
Case in
Sorry, I
point there
introduced
is,
this can of worms.
case in point on that exact point
Yeah.
would be a person having a priest coming in
To do last rites.
before, before they're executed for a crime. Yeah, now, there you go, now what? Now you have potentially
Yeah.
the worst dichotomy.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that mean that they're absolved of all their crimes? Unless they committed one after they were absolved, before they were executed. I'm sorry. I apologize for those of you that maybe come from a Catholic background. I'm so fascinated by when you really start to drill down on like holistic issues. I mean, this is where limbo comes out of. Is what if we don't get the water to them before they die, right? Is that, well, there was that window where original sin was still in effect, which just feels like, man, alive, if anybody's interested in that kind of bureaucratic paperwork, it would be the devil, right? Anyways. Okay, I gotta talk. We got 8 minutes. Okay. But Warner, rest assured, this is gonna be central to what we're talking about, right?
Just one quick part of that question. I think grace is a gift. Like, you get a gift. You get a gift, can you thankful? Can you act out in gratitude?
Well, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Have you ever given a gift to your grandchildren that was unappreciated?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So,
And was it still a gift?
it was-
Did you still feel good about giving that gift?
and that's fine, Mr. Luther's, if you say it's holy,
Yeah.
and it's fine to wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
And there, yeah.
This is a trigger for me because my grandparents, I love them dearly. For them, the rules that they were raised with is, yes, please, thank you for everything, right? And if you receive a gift, you make sure that you know how much you appreciate that gift, even if you do not appreciate that gift at all, right? You assuage the gift giver's ego in the process. And so when we didn't do that, we were somewhat wrong.
My problem always been coming from the Nazarene to the Lutheran is, okay, it's a gift that we're given, we don't earn it, we're just given this gift. But if you don't accept the gift and open the gift, it does you no good.
Oh, Lord.
And so that acceptance thing, I just struggle with that.
Brenda, I wrote some really bad theology papers trying to articulate this.
I still
This
can't,
is-
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we worked on a little bit of, this is a really good tangent, because after all, this is exactly the kind of stuff that we should, I think, in some way be able to articulate to folks, right? Is we say that Jesus dies for our sins, or Jesus dies for us because God loves us. What is the extent of that? Is there fine print underneath, right? And again, you might think that I'm trying to push you one way or the other. I'm trying not to, right? Because ultimately, really, I mean, for you, right, it's really important about what you believe. What does this word mean to you? Because it's important about how you articulate it. And, I struggle with the same idea. I struggle with the idea that people can be Christian in name, right? The Pew poll from 2018, Pew Forum, showed that we have almost doubled the number of people. So we continue to lose people that are practicing of any faith, right? That nuns category is continuing to increase. In other words, what's your religious identity? None of the above, right? But the number that has grown exponentially is the people that identify as Christian but do not practice, do not attend a congregation regularly. They read the Bible on their own, they pray at home. And they read the Bible literally, which again, do they literally read the Bible? Are they actually reading the Bible? Or do they read the Bible literally? If they read it literally, why do they cut their hair? Right? It's like,
Is that different from Jews who say they're Jewish but they're not practicing?
well, that's a good question, right? It's an ethnic identity. Have we, okay, well, we're getting there. Have we in the United States created a cultural or ethnic identity which is Christian?
We have
Yeah. Yes. Okay. I mean, you nailed it, right? This is what we're getting to. Let me run through the rest of these definitions real quick. We'll come back to evangelical next week. And we'll introduce some words. Okay. So definition 1 of related to or being in agreement with the Christian gospel, especially as it is presented in the four gospels. This is, by the way, directly from Merriam-Webster, which is one of two broadly accepted dictionaries in the United States. The other is American Collegiate Dictionary or whatever it's called. You know. Number 2, Protestant. Just Protestant. Okay. Number 3, here's where it gets sticky. Emphasizing salvation by faith, and just count the number of stained glass words that are in this definition. Emphasizing salvation by faith in the atoning death of Jesus Christ through personal conversion, the authority of Scripture, and the importance of preaching as contrast with ritual. That's definition number 3 in Merriam-Webster. Okay? So again, you're coming from the outside. You for whatever reason, you're interested in Christianity, you Googled churches, you found Milwaukie Lutheran Church, you're curious what it's about, you looked it up on their website. Right on our website it says we're a member of the ELCA. We've got a logo with a link to the ELCA website, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. They said it themselves, I thought the evangelicals were the specific people that have these beliefs. They don't seem to hold those beliefs. What does evangelical mean? They Google the word evangelical, they go to Merriam-Webster, and they arrive at this. Okay?
I'm reading a book called Anti-Intellectualism in America.
Uh-huh.
And it traces back to the founding fathers who were few of the educated people, the
Yeah.
majority of the farmers.
Yeah.
And when Madison put no established, she'd say, religion words in the Constitution, that led to the proliferation of Protestant denominations in the United States. That didn't happen everywhere. And bringing in pastors who were not trained in theology, but were really fiery speakers. And a friend of mine goes to a mega church in
Yeah.
Tigard, and I looked on their website,
Yeah.
and have 4 pastors, none of them list any academic credentials at all.
Wow.
And so that's part of this.
And yeah, and I would say I have a bias in this. I spend a lot of personal funds getting my master's in divinity on top of my bachelor's in chemical engineering. I went through a candidacy process where my intellect and my psychology was reviewed by a licensed professional to make sure that I wasn't going to do bad things, or in their best approximation, I wasn't going to do bad things. Yeah. So I have a bias in this. But this is, one of the things that we have to recognize is that this is one of the really polarizing issues in terms of when we look at a word like Christianity, who does that apply to, or what does that mean? Is that and this is Luther's home, by the way. We've got one person to blame, it's Martin Luther. Luther does his thing, Melanchthon is involved there, breaking away from the Catholic Church. Well, they didn't really break away, they got kicked out of, and then the consequences followed after. And then in the next 50 years, one of the consequences of that is Luther was really adamant that everybody should be able to read and access Scripture. It should not be put behind the 15th century version of paywalls, right? And guess what happened as a result? Everybody began reading Scripture, whether they actually understood what they were reading or not. And again, Anabaptist tradition is fantastic and varied, but one of the big peoples that came out of that were the Anabaptists. This is where we get that fantastic story about Munster, Germany, where the prophets of doom took over and basically kicked everybody out except the single women. Well, they were married, but in their eyes they were single. And the German princes, But yeah, this is definitely a contemporary issue of should professional clergy have some kind of process smells and bells, right? Smells and bells being very high church. In other words, everybody processes in, and there's lots of accoutrements, up on the altar, and you may have a sense, you're probably not in the 21st century because of allergies, etc. Right? There is no such thing as hypoallergenic incense. It doesn't exist. Right? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Exactly.
We'll have, certainly on,
High holy days, etc.
smells and bells
Yeah.
and the whole thing.
And I would argue that high church, especially in a lot of contexts, means that you follow an order of service, right? In your case, we would common prayer. In our case, we follow evangelical Lutheran worship or a variation thereof, or the LBW of your old school, or the Lutheran or the original Black Book, Red Book before the Black Book, right? So you follow a head of the liturgy before you use that word. Contrast with low church, which essentially is just absent that stuff. Okay? And again, biased, super biased, very, 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 very biased. When you're absent a lot of this stuff, who determines the stuff, right? Because everybody has liturgy. Everybody has liturgy. Every church has liturgy, right? Everybody has the things that they do every week that are part of their ritual. Everybody has ritual. It's just different ritual, right? And this is one of the things that gets me fired up. How do we end our worship service? Before we even do the blessing and sending, what's the last thing that we do?
Sending out.
Sending out. Sorry, it's not quite the last thing. It's the second last thing we do.
Benediction, is that what you're at?
Before that, meal. We do communion, right? Our service closes with a meal, right? It happens after the sermon, right? So the great thing about that is, whether or not I proclaim the good news at all in the sermon, you get good news in the meal, okay? The first time I went to a non-denominational church, I was shocked because I came in and the pastor literally did a mic drop. He spoke for and it was a he, for 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and then said, all right, he did the church version of, tip your server, we'll see you next week. And that was it. He got the last word. There was no word after his word. They didn't even do go in peace, love, to love and serve the Lord. There was no blessing, no benediction, right? So, what's their liturgy? Well, that's the liturgy. Okay. Finally, definition number 5. I've been all waiting for this one. Definition number 505. Marked by militant or crusading zeal. Evangelistic. Okay? So, okay, folks. We should probably worship it. I just wanted to kind of summarize it real quick. So, one of the things that we talk about is what does the word mean today? Well, here we have. Here is the complexity and the difficulty of what does this word mean today. And I would invite you to imagine what it would be like for somebody Googling the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America to do this and try to understand who we are. Impossible, right? And here's the thing that so many people have learned to do, which is to distrust websites. Okay? Because if you go on our website, you will see that we make statements about how we are welcoming to all. We have a link that goes to reconciling with Christ, telling you that at least in some way we have nothing against gay people. But you go on our website and see that, you Google this word, you're going to be presented with a bit of a conundrum, which is, well, who are we? Are we welcoming? Can I be one of those folks that shows up? Or is it all a bait and switch? Right? Are you pretending to be welcoming so that I'll come in the door to make your pitch, right? Get me to give you money and then try and brainwash me into being, one of those people. This is why this is so important.
Jim mentions the lungs explain and describe.
The elephant? Yeah.
I love it.
Yes. Yeah, is everybody familiar with that metaphor, right? 5 or 6, I can never remember how many. And one guy's touching the foot, the other guy's touching the trunk, one's touching the tail, and they're all describing their different experiences of this. And if you were to combine all of their descriptions, you don't come up with an elephant. Right? That's the point. Okay, so next week we're gonna take back what did evangelical mean, and we're gonna look at 3, we're gonna look at some etymology, and then we'll also again introduce new words. I took pictures of seeing